Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 211. Shizun, let's enter Mount Qiao. They abandoned their horses and entered the mountain range. The first day passed with no mishap. However, on the second night while everyone was sitting in meditation to rest, something unexpected happened. A cultivator went to the forest to relieve himself in the middle of the night. After he was done, he felt an itch in his leg. He looked down and saw a huge poisonous mosquito resting between his legs, happily drinking his blood. That cultivator slapped the mosquito to death and out of habit muttered, "Motherfucker, you dare to sting me, your grandfather." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard strange noises coming from the surrounding forest. The cultivator was startled. He suddenly remembered what Nangongsi had warned them before everyone entered the mountain. He was so scared that he didn't even have time to pull up his pants. He ran wildly, shouting, "Save me, Shizun! Save me!" It turned out that this person was one of the disciples of Zhang Donghal who served as Huang Xiaoyu's attendants. His loud cry for his father and mother was like a huge rock falling into a deep pool, stirring up 1,000 ripples. Everyone who was originally sitting quietly in meditation stood up one after another. They saw a Zhang Donghal cultivator running madly from a distance, scared out of his wits. This person was Bear. His exposed dick shook as he was crying and running at the same time. Behind him were at least 100 small black snakes, some of which had already wrapped around his legs. Huang Xiaoyu was alarmed. "Is it one of my disciples?" Nangongsi warned, "Don't go over." That disciple cried as he ran over, but more and more snakes wrapped around him. In the end, he staggered and fell to the ground. He wailed, "Shizun! Shizun, save me!" Huang Xiaoyu originally wanted to lend a helping hand, but Nangongsi said, "Those snakes are formed from the dragon's whiskers. If you kill one, it will turn into two. The more you kill, the more there will be. Moreover, they are extremely vengeful. If Huang Daozang isn't afraid, then go and fight them off." When Huang Xiaoyu heard this, he immediately cowered and muttered, "The bigger picture is more important, the bigger picture is more important." Seeing his disciple being swallowed up by the wave of black snakes, that person writhed and rolled in the snake tide, twisting and turning in pain. The wave of snakes had completely covered him, turning him into a black mound. This mound was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. When the tide dispersed, there was only a pool of blood on the ground, not even a bone was left. Once this matter was made known, no one dared to utter a single word of nonsense on the last days of the journey. The more one talks, the more chances one might make mistake. This was a principle that everyone knew. Xue Zhenyang even cast a silencing spell on himself, as well as Xue Meng. Not for any other reason than because the father and son were too talkative. If they accidentally muttered the word bastard, they would end up into snake's meal in the blink of an eye. Everyone was extra cautious with their words and actions until finally, in the middle of the third night, they passed through the mountain range of Mount Qiao and arrived at the hero's tomb of the Rufeng sect Mount Qiao. The barrier of Mount Qiao was different from that of Mount Huang. The Jiao dragon hated deception, so the barrier was transparent. There was no illusion technique, so from the outside, one could clearly see the scene at the foot of the mountain. Zhang Shi looked at the situation in front of him and asked, "Is this the burial ground of the elites of the Rufeng sect?" The moonlight shone on Nangongsi's face. He was silent for a moment, then replied, "That's right. Mount Qiao was created by a demonic dragon. After the first sect leader of Rufeng sect subdued this dragon, he established a blood contract with it. After its death, it turned into a mountain to protect the heroic souls and the treasures of the Rufeng sect, as well as the ancestral temple and the ancestral hall of the Nangong family. Since Nangongsi could remember, he would follow his father to this mountain to sweep the tombs every winter solstice. In the past, when he came here, he would see endless majestic white marble steps. Dark city guards would already be waiting on both sides of the mountain road. Their clothes fluttered in the wind as they saluted. We respectfully welcome the young master. He could still vaguely hear the rumbling of voices as everyone knelt down. He walked along the mountain road, and at the top of the mountain, he could see his father preparing for the sacrificial ceremony. Young Master Nangong, there's no need to be sentimental. The war cannot be delayed. You should open the barrier as soon as possible, so that we can enter and slay the demons. Nangong Si turned his head. The one who spoke was Huang Xiaoyu. During the golden age of the Rufeng sect, if he went and gave this kind of person 10 slaps for no reasons but pure whim, he still wouldn't dare to say anything. Today, they would even brag and glare at him in front of his ancestral grave, flaunting their might. Nangong Si endured silently. He had no choice but to endure. His teeth clenched painfully, but he had to endure with all his might. Everyone, step back a bit, he said as he arrived in front of the mountain gate. There stood 2 tomb guardians made from evil warding spirit stone. Just their toes alone were the size of a 5 or 6 years old child. These 2 statues each had 3 faces, either benevolent or angry. They each held a magic tool in their hands and had bracelets around their arms. But the strange thing was that this kind of statue usually had their eyes wide open. However, this pair of statues had their eyes closed and their eyebrows furrowed, making them look somewhat strange. Nangong Si didn't even blink. He pierced his finger with an arrow and drew a talisman on the evil warding spirit stone. Then he said, Rufeng sect's 7th generation ancestor of the Rufeng sect, Nangong Si, pays his respect. Rumble. The earth shook. A random person from the crowd exclaimed, the eyes are open. That statue opened their eyes. Standing amongst the crowd, Mo Ran also raised his head and looked up. If the situation wasn't so tense, he really wanted to say to that person, it's not that statue, it's those 2 statues. The 2 tomb guardians on the left and right opened their eyes. Their eyes were ember and their pupils were narrow, like the eyes of a snake. The statue on the left slowly spoke, his voice like a large bell, ringing out, Nangong Si, have you memorized the 7 precepts of the Rufeng sect? Nangong Si said, greed, resentment, deceit, murder, rape, and plunder are the 7 things that a disciple of Rufeng sect mustn't do. Huang Xiaoyu sneered behind him, you speak better than you sing. It wasn't just Huang Xiaoyu, but many people were thinking the same thing. These 7 precepts were the greatest mockery to the current Rufeng sect. The statue on the right followed with a distant voice that seemed to come from ancient times, Nangong Si, there is a mirror hanging high above and below it is the vast yellow springs. As you walk through the world, do you have a clear conscience? I have a clear conscience. These 2 questions and answers were memorized by Nangong Si from childhood. No matter who it was in the Nangong family, as long as they stepped into the hero's tomb, they had to first answer these 2 questions. The first generation of the Rufeng sect set up these 2 questions in the hope that the later generations of the family would remember the teachings of their ancestors and reflect on themselves when they went up the mountain to worship. At this moment, Nangong Si couldn't help but wonder, every year when his father came to make offerings during winter solstice and answered these 2 questions, did he ever feel the slightest trace of guilt? Or did he really simply treat these questions and answers as a key, a talisman to open the barrier of Mount Qiao? And nothing more. The barrier opened. The 2 stone statues that were originally standing suddenly shook slowly and changed their posture. Finally, they knelt on one knee, one on the left and one on the right. Please, Master, enter the mountain. Nangong Si stood with his back to the crowd for a while. No one could see the expression on his face, not even Ye Wangzi. Only Nao Beijing whimpered in his quiver. His snow-white claws reached out and grabbed the edge of the quiver, awoo, awoo. Come in. After saying this, Nangong Si took the lead and stepped into Mount Qiao. Shui Zhenyang removed the silencing spell on himself and asked, Do we still need to pay attention to our words and actions here? No need. Nangongsi said, speaking and acting cautiously has to be observed in the vicinity of the mountain range. This was also to prevent people who have malicious intentions towards the Rufeng sect from entering the mountain. Once this place is reached, the Jiao dragon would deem that the person who came can't be an enemy and so will no longer levy punishment for their profane words. But even though he said so, many people were still worried and did not want to say anything. They just silently followed Nangongsi up the mountain. Every 300 meters, there would be 2 totem stones of the 12 zodiac signs. First were the male and female mice, then the male and female ox, tiger, rabbit. Halfway up the mountain was where the tombs of the heroes of the Rufeng sect were erected. These heroes were buried in Mount Jiao in accordance to their lifetime contributions to the sect, from low to high. The first tombs they came to was the burial ground at the lowest level. There was an 8-foot-tall piece of white jade here. It was shining brightly and engraved with the names of people. At the top, there were characters which said, "Loyal soul." I heard that the loyal servants of the Nangong family are buried here. Xuemeng whispered to Mo Ran, there should be at least 1,000 of them. He was right. This mountain area was densely packed with tombs which end could not be seen at all. Shi Mei said worriedly, what if these thousands of servants all rise up? What should we do? The servants of the Nangong family are not bad. I'm afraid they can hold us back for a while. Xuemeng hurriedly covered his mouth. SHH, are you crazy? Hurry up and spit, don't jinx. Mo Ran said gloomily from the side, I'm afraid it really isn't a jinx. Hey, you dog, where are you going? Mo Ran did not pay attention to Xuemeng. He left the group and walked to the burial ground of the loyal souls. He half knelt down and carefully looked at it. The burial ground of the Rufeng sect's heroes was different from ordinary funerals. It did not have a burial ground. Instead, it used a kind of translucent jade coffin. It was like a thick layer of ice. Half of the coffin was submerged in the ground while the other half was exposed. Therefore, the burial ground looked like a continuous stretch of jade that emitted a sparkling brilliance under the moonlight. This kind of cold jade was similar to the mortuary coffin of the Skyfrost Hall in Shisheng Peak. It could preserve the corpse and prevent it from decaying, making the corpse look just like how they were when they were still alive. Mo Ran lowered his head to look at the coffin in front of him. These burial mounds were not taken care of too carefully. Therefore, the surface of the jade coffin was covered with a thick layer of dust. Mo Ran could only vaguely see the outline of the deceased below. He could not see the facial features well, but it seemed to be a woman. He stared at the woman for a while. Then, he looked around the coffin again. He felt that there was something wrong with this coffin. But he could not exactly point out what was it. While no one was paying attention, he put his hand on the coffin and closed his eyes to feel it carefully. Suddenly, his palm trembled. Mo Ran opened his eyes. His expression became extremely ugly. There was indeed evil energy in this coffin, but it was not dense enough. The Zhenlong chess piece was not inside it. Could it be that he was wrong? Mo Ran. Xuemeng and the others were already far away. They shouted at him from afar. Mo Ran whispered to himself, I'll be right there. His slender hand rubbed the surface of the coffin inch by inch, wiping off the thick layer of dust. He tried to see the woman's appearance more clearly without opening the coffin. As he was wiping it, he suddenly saw a detail from the corner of his eyes. He stopped abruptly. He knew what was wrong now. It's the dust. The dust of this coffin was not right. Besides the area that he had just wiped, Mo Ran suddenly found that there was another place that was not dusty on the side of the coffin. There were 4 marks of different lengths. He hesitated for a moment and reached out to compare them. He found that it was exactly the place where a person would climb out. Except for the thumb, this is the place where the other 4 fingers would touch. Mo Ran was frightened. Just as he was about to ask everyone to stop going up the mountain, he suddenly felt a cold, wet air in front of him. He raised his head abruptly and was met with a deathly pale face. A woman in shroud was squatting behind a tombstone, staring at him faintly. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Book 3, Final Battle. Chapter 212. Mount Xiao, founder of the sect. Don't go forward. Retreat. Retreat. Everyone go back. Go back to the foot of the mountain. Suddenly, a shout rang out. Everyone turned around and saw Mo Ran, who was dressed in black, rushing over. Behind him, a female corpse was chasing after him, letting out a terrifying shriek. Shui Zhenyang was shocked. Ran air? What's going on? Retreat. Go back. Under Mo Ran's pitch-black eyes, his gaze was like a pair of unsheathed daggers. He shouted at Nangong Si, Nangong. Drop the soul-repelling stone in front of you. Nangong Si immediately rushed to the top of the mountain. Above the group of loyal souls were the graves of Rufeng sect's high-level disciples. In order to prevent future generations from causing trouble, a long wall was set up between the two groups of graves to act as a barrier. He sprinted with Ye Wangzi followed closely behind. However, before they reached the soul-repelling wall, Nangong Si suddenly stopped. A group of people slowly walked down from the top of the mountain path. They were all dressed in black, their silk ribbons fluttered in the wind. At first glance, it was as if the Rufeng sect had not been destroyed yet, and a group of valiant and formidable disciples of the Rufeng sect had just arrived. However, Nangong Si knew that something was wrong. Ye Wangzi can also see it. There was a difference between these disciples of the Rufeng sect and the ones they used to live with. Each of them had a blue ribbon embroidered with the shadow of a crane in front of their eyes. It seemed like a very small difference, but the people of the Nangong family knew what it meant. Living people would never wear these ribbons to cover their eyes. These ribbons were given to the disciples of the Rufeng sect to wear before they were buried. It meant that their eyes would cover the auspicious clouds, ride the crane to the west and live happily forever. Those who came down the mountain were all dead people of the Rufeng sect. Nangong Si took a step back, raised his hand, and subconsciously stopped Ye Wangzi. He did not turn around and only said in a low voice, "Go down. Go down. Go tell Grand Master Mo that it's too late." Nangong Si took a deep breath and said in a slightly trembling voice, "The previous generations of high-level disciples of the Rufeng sect have all been resurrected and are currently rushing down the mountain. What about you? I'll hold them off for a while. Hurry up." Nangong Si turned his face slightly and said to Ye Wangzi, "Tell them to retreat as far as possible to the foot of the mountain. Once they've retreated to that side, send out the smoke signal and I'll come down immediately." Ye Wangzi bit her lip. She was very clear that there was no turning back. The last thing she could do was take off her quiver and toss it to Nangong Si. She said in a deep voice, "Take it. You don't remember to take more." By the time she rushed to the mountainside, a fierce battle had already unfolded. The corpses of the loyal servants of the Rufeng sect who had previously hidden themselves, rushed out from the bushes, rocks, and all kinds of hiding places like locusts and threw themselves at the cultivators and engaged them in a battle. These corpses were all wearing shrouds, and their bodies were completely pale. They were mixed in with the cultivators who were wearing different kinds of clothes, like rolling waves of snow. From a distance, it was quite a spectacular scene. However, the price for this spectacular scene was too high. In a split second, the mountain was filled with bursts of mournful cries and battle cries. Ye Wangzi caught a glimpse of several coffins that had been blasted open by spiritual power during the fierce battle. There were only clothes inside, but they were arranged in the shape of a person. Her Yufa was like a crafty rabbit. He displayed an image of a peaceful tomb of loyal souls. In reality, he had already summoned the corpses inside the tomb and hid them in the dark. He was waiting for them to reach the highest point, then he would mobilize the summoned corpses of the high-level corpses to attack from the front, while the low-level servants were attacking from their back. He had laid a net and they were the fish that was caught in this net. Ye Wangzi found Mo Ran in the midst of the chaotic battle. Grand Master Mo. Mo Ran was in the middle of fighting with 5 corpses. When he heard Ye Wangzi's voice, he suddenly raised his head and anxiously said, "What?" Before he could even finish the question, he saw Ye Wangzi's face and knew the answer. Mo Ran cursed inwardly. Coincidentally, a fierce corpse bit his arm. He couldn't shake it off, so he angrily put his hand into the fierce corpse's mouth. With a fierce look in his eyes, he exerted his strength and tore the fierce corpse's tongue out. Ow! Black blood splashed everywhere. That fierce corpse couldn't bite him anymore. It was hit in the chest by his elbow and fell to the ground. Mo Ran's black eyes were terrifyingly bright and his expression was ruthless. When he looked at Ye Wangzi again, she couldn't help but shiver. However, she immediately steadied herself and said, "Ah-si wants everyone to retreat as soon as possible. Retreat to the foot of the mountain and wait for him." Mo Ran nodded. In an instant, his voice spread throughout the chaotic battlefield. "Stop fighting. Everyone retreat to the foot of the mountain. Everyone retreat to the foot of the mountain." Huang Xiaoyu immediately became anxious. We were already prepared to fight to the death with Su Xuanglin. This scene in front of us is already within our expectations. How can we retreat now? Mo Ran didn't care about him at all. People die for wealth while birds die for food. Huang Xiaoyu wanted to rush to the top of the mountain with all his strength so that he could find the sect treasures hidden in the Rufeng sect's temple. That was the old man's own business. He still sternly repeated, "If you don't want to die, go down the mountain. Immediately. Go down." Although these servant corpses weren't strong, they weren't the weak corpses of the commoners on Mount Huang. Moreover, their numbers were astonishing high and they didn't fear pain. They rushed up one after another. By the time everyone had retreated to the foot of the mountain, more than 10 cultivators had already died in battle. Huang Xiaoyu also retreated. He also knew that with his own ability, it was impossible for him to kill his way to the top of the mountain alone. However, he sneered and said, "Grand Master Mo, this is great. The one who said that we should come to Mount Jiao was you. Halfway through the battle, the one who told us to retreat was also you. You're really capable. What do we do now? Why don't you take the lead and make us follow you out of the barrier?" In his previous life, this man wasn't even worthy enough to carry the shoes of the cultivation emperor, Taxian Jun. Killing him would simply dirty his hands. In this life, Mo Ran had become a righteous grandmaster. That was why he couldn't slap him in public. However, Mo Ran could choose to ignore him. Huang Xiaoyu was about to speak again when he suddenly saw a cloud of rolling smoke in front of him. It was Nangongsi riding the demon wolf Nao Beijin, who had transformed into his true form again. He rushed over like a gust of wind, followed by hundreds of high-level disciples of the Rufeng sect. Huang Xiaoyu looked over and said in surprise, "Oh, no. We fell into a trap." Mo Ran narrowed his eyes. This old thing finally reacted. He knew that this was an ambush set up by Su Xuanglin. So, he wasn't that stupid after all. However, the second half of Huang Xiaoyu's was, "Nangongsi. You've got guts? You actually gathered the remnants of the Rufeng sect on Mount Qiao. Do you want to fight the other sects?" Mo ran. Nangongsi crouched low on the demon wolf and rushed forward. Nao Beijin was as fast as an arrow, leaving the pursuing corpses behind him farther and farther away. At this time, Huang Xiaoyu realized that he had misunderstood the situation. However, he didn't feel guilty at all. Instead, he stared at the approaching corpses with wide eyes and gulped. Nangongsi rushed into the crowd and jumped down from the demon wolf. He stuffed the quiver of arrows into Ye Wangzi's arms and said while gasping for breath, "I still have some arrows left. I'll return them to you first. You take everyone and retreat." Ye Wangzi originally relaxed when she heard the first half of the sentence, but the second half made her suddenly raise her head and stare at Nangongsi. "What are you going to do?" "A small matter." On the side, Huang Xiaoyu watched as the high-level disciples of the Rufeng sect got closer and closer. Seeing that they were about to fight with the former elites of the Rufeng sect, who had died hundreds of years ago, he turned his head and cursed, "Nangongsi! You troublemaker! You're just like your father. Why do you want to lead these monsters to us? Do you want us to kill them for you?" Seeing that Nangongsi didn't even pay any attention to him, Huang Xiaoyu became even angrier. He said in a trembling voice, "Good, I finally know what you're planning. You're afraid that you can't reach the top of the mountain alone and can't get the treasures your father left for you. That's why you led us here to open the way for you. Nangongsi! You're so vicious." Seeing that his words were becoming more and more excessive, Xue Zhenyang couldn't help but frown and say, "All right, Huang Daozang, you should shut up now." "Shut up? Why should I shut up?" Huang Xiaoyu didn't put the lower cultivation world in his eyes at all. Normally, he would be a bit calmer and take Xue Zhenjiang's face into consideration, but at this critical moment, he didn't have the heart to pretend anymore. He pointed at Nangongsi and cursed, "You're really the son of an evil beast with the heart of a tiger and a wolf. You actually want to use the elites of the cultivation world to clear the way for you. Where did you get the face to do that? Nangongsi!" Huang Xiaoyu didn't give up and said angrily, "A person like you should die to appease the world, but you actually escaped from the horde of fierce corpses and led these bastards to us. You pack." A very loud slap landed solidly on Huang Xiaoyu's face. The gentleman, Ye Wangzi, was still in the same position as when she slapped Huang Xiaoyu. She was trembling slightly and gasping for breath. Her eyes were ruthless as she stared at the person in front of her. "Bastard!" She spoke in a hoarse voice. "How can I tolerate such filthy words in front of the hero's grave of my Rufeng sect?" Zhang Dongtang's people drew their swords and pointed at Ye Wangzi. A middle-aged female cultivator under Huang Xiaoyu raised her eyebrows and shouted at her, "You're neither a man nor a woman. How dare you attack your elders? You're the bastard. You're just a lackey of the Rufeng sect." She shouted and was about to rush up to Ye Wangzi to teach her a lesson. Mo Ran was about to help when he suddenly heard the sound of a whip swishing through the air. In a dazzling golden light, Chu Wanning walked out of the crowd. He held Tianwen and narrowed his eyes. He had his back to Ye Wangzi as he faced the group from Jiangdong Hall. "I've said it before," he said, enunciating each word, "Nangongsi is my disciple. If you don't want to go through a trial by Tianyan Pavilion and want to take matters in your own hands, then you'll have to go through me first. We can either talk justice and fight it out with our weapons." In the dead silence, he threw out the last half of his sentence, "I'll accompany you to the end." The atmosphere was extremely tense for a moment. The group from Jiangdong Hall didn't know whether to advance or retreat. If they retreated, they would lose face. If they advanced, could they really take on Yu Heng of the Night Sky, Chu Wanning? Moreover, should they really form a grudge with Chu Wanning and be an enemy of him from there on? The fierce corpses were still approaching, getting closer and closer. Someone couldn't help but shout, "Stop fighting. Let's talk about it outside. Think of a solution first to this situation. What should we do? Should we fight? Should we just fight like this? Then why did we retreat to the foot of the mountain? What's the difference between this and fighting on the mountain?" That's right. Mo Ran couldn't help but think, what's the difference? Although he understood that Nangongsi's actions weren't without purpose. As the last descendant of the Nangong clan, Nangongsi must have had a plan in mind since he told them to retreat to the foot of the mountain. He couldn't help but look at Nangongsi, who hadn't uttered a single word since the beginning. He suddenly discovered that the man's eyes were shining with an indescribable light. A light that made him shudder. "Nangong!" he shouted, but it was useless. Nangongsi had been silently chanting a forbidden spell since the beginning. Since Huang Xiaoyu pointed at his nose and scolded him, he had been chanting this forbidden spell. But it was already too late to notice. Countless vines broke through the ground with a loud rumble. Mo Ran, Ye Wangzi, Xuemeng, everyone was entangled by the willow vines at almost the same time. Then, in an instant, they were thrown out of the barrier, out of the mountain range of Mount Qiao. Ye Wangzi's expression changed. "Aussie! What are you trying to do?" She wanted to rush in again, but Nangongsi raised his hand and waved. The two tomb guardians stood up with heavy steps. Stone powder fell from their bodies. They raised their left and right hands respectively, facing each other. In an instant, a new translucent barrier covered the entire entrance of Mount Qiao, blocking everyone's way in. Nangongsi stood in front of the barrier alone, facing the thousands of fierce corpses. His back was facing everyone behind the barrier. He said, "There are vines on Mount Qiao. They are formed from the dragon tendons and can pull everything underground. But you can't be inside. As long as you don't have the blood of the Nangong clan flowing in you, once I use this array, the dragon tendon vines will not distinguish between friends and foes. They will pull you all underground and bury you alive." Ye Wangzi was filled with grief and anger. She shouted in despair, "Nangongsi! Do you know you're alone?" She hammered the barrier, but could only shout at him from outside, "Nangongsi! How am I alone?" Nangongsi turned half of his face. "Don't I still have you?" Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he actually broke into a smile. That brilliant smile had not appeared on his face since the destruction of the Rufeng sect. It was unbridled, wild, and blazing. It was as if his high spirit of many years had returned to his face. His pair of eyes were bright and unrestrained. Nangongsi looked just like he was of many years ago, when he and Ye Wangzi first entered the illusion trial. He tilted his face, held his sword, and smiled at her. "But you girls are really useless. In the end, I still have to protect you." With that, he turned around and strode towards the horde of fierce corpses. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. Then stop. Nangongsi stabbed his sword into the ground, untied the gauze on his hand and fiercely cut along the sharp edge of the sword. Blood rolled down, flowing along the blood groove of the sword and into the moist soil of Mount Qiao. Nangongsi's eyes were cold, looking straight ahead, without fear. He did not know that at this moment, in the eyes of Mo Ran, who was standing outside the barrier, his figure was overlapping with Ye Wangzi, who fought to the death in his previous life. In the end, they became one person and it was difficult to separate them. Blood sacrifice to the Azure Dragon, obtain its bones and muscles. Nangongsi said, "Array open." Countless vines broke out from the cracked ground and in a flash, sand and mud flew everywhere. These vines were completely different from the ones that had trapped and thrown everyone out before. These were scarlet vines without any leaves or branches. It could even be said that these vines were thick blood vessels, rising from the depths of Mount Qiao. They instantly climbed onto each of the corpses controlled by the Zhenlong chess formation. Nangongsi used his own strength to move more than 1,000 dragon tendons out of the ground, and in an instant, he used up a lot of his spiritual energy. Sweat seeped out of his forehead and the hand holding the sword trembled slightly. The veins on the back of his hand bulged, as his old wounds ruptured, and blood flowed freely. Sink. His face was pale, and he trembled as he gave the final order. Those 1,000 dragon tendons began to fiercely pull the corpses down, but those fierce corpses obviously would not sit still and wait for death. They all roared, fight and struggled with all their might. At this time, Nangongsi and the dragon tendons shared the same spiritual energy. These thousands of fierce corpses were struggling, and he had no choice but to squeeze out more energy out of himself. Through the sacrifice of blood to the ground, he urged the dragon tendons to use more strength to pull the corpses down. Sunk to their ankles, calves, thighs, the fierce corpses all over the mountain were howling, stretching their necks and hissing, saliva dripping from the corners of their mouths. Nangongsi gasped for breath. Thighs, still thighs, he could feel that his spiritual energy was almost exhausted, but those fierce corpses had not completely sunk to the ground yet. They were still angrily twisting their bodies, using their hands to support themselves, trying to break free. A little more, to the waist, at least to the waist, this way, he could undo the spell and then he could let the people from outside back inside again. This way, these fierce corpses would not break free and turn the situation around in an instant. A little bit. Just a little more. His spiritual energy was almost depleted as he exerted his spiritual core. Nangongsi felt a dull pain in his heart. His spiritual core was already unstable, and with him overexerting it, it started to tremble in his chest. He clenched his teeth tightly, but blood still flowed down the corner of his lips. A little more. Sink them to the waist, very good. They were all extremely difficult to move, but they were not the most stable. The corpse's strength was even greater than when they were alive, and once buried here, they could still make a breakthrough. A little more. Cough, cough. He once again released powers from his spiritual core, causing Nangongsi to feel a wave dizziness. Unable to support himself, he knelt on the ground as he vomited a mouthful of blood, which dripped and soaked the black soil. Nangongsi shakily raised his eyelids. In the shaking shadows, he saw that the corpses were dragged deeper into the ground by the dragon tendons, almost burying them up to their chests. These monsters could not move for the time being. Nangongsi's lips and teeth were blood red, and he laughed. He heard Ye Wangzi shouting outside, "Asi! Enough! Open the barrier! Quickly open the barrier!" Xue Zhenyang also shouted, "Quickly open the barrier, Nangong! Let us help you! Nangong, quickly open the barrier! Open the barrier!" The people shouting gradually increased. In this world, not everyone was completely heartless. Nangongsi smiled. After the destruction of the Rufeng sect, he had suffered so many grievances, but he did not shed a tear. But at this moment, he suddenly felt tears rolled down his cheeks. He choked and murmured hoarsely, "I know, I'll open it. I'll open it." He raised his trembling hand, ready to remove the barrier that was blocking everyone. However, the ground suddenly trembled, and then it began to shift slightly. Nangongsi obviously felt it. He was suddenly startled, then raised his head and looked at the scene in front of him with an expression of disbelief. The dragon tendons that followed his orders to drag the corpses deep into the ground suddenly loosened one by one and then wrapped around the corpses' chests and backs, pulling them out of the ground one by one. "Impossible!" Nangongsi said blankly, "This is impossible. How could the Dragon Mountain not listen to its master's orders? Even if Su Xuanglin gave the opposite order, the dragon tendons would never obey, because for the sleeping dragon evil spirit, the descendants of the Nangong family were the same. If the two descendants of the Nangong family gave the opposite order to the Dragon Mountain would only stop its current action and not help anyone, becoming neutral. Unless Nangongsi suddenly had a layer of goosebumps, he thought of a person. This thought made his body tremble all over, and the pain in his heart seemed to be even worse than before. He gasped and slowly raised his head. A tall and dignified man was slowly walking down the long stairs. He was wearing a luxurious brocade robe, embroidered with a dragon swallowing the sun and moon within a sea of clouds. Every step he took, the gold and silver threads cast on the robe would emit a water-like luster under the moonlight, floating and glittering. Above the bridge of his nose, there was a ribbon that only the deceased of the Rufeng sect would wear. It covered his eyes, but that ribbon was not green, but black. What was embroidered on it was not a red-crowned crane, but an azure dragon with powerful claws and flames spewing out of it. Nangong's face became as white as paper as he stared at the man who was calmly walking down the stairs step by step. He opened his eyes wide in disbelief and muttered, "How? How is this possible? Grand Sect Master." The moonlight peeked out from the forest, illuminating the man's handsome, clean-cut face. It was him. The only person in the world who could make the Dragon Mountain disobey the order of the Nangong family's descendant, who could subdue the demon dragon, who could suppress the ancient evil beast Gun under the Golden Drum Pagoda. He was the one who founded the cultivation sect that became the greatest sect in hundreds of years. He was the greatest Grand Master of the world hundreds of years ago. He was the one who gave up on ascending to the heavens in order to lessen the suffering of the mortal world. He was the first sect master of the Rufeng sect, Nangong Zhongying. End chapter.